So that standard 90 degrees matters for some people, but what if that's not your sport? What if you are a field athlete or a court athlete? For example, let's say that you're playing baseball or football or field hockey or basketball, or you're playing ice hockey. Doesn't matter that you squat as low as you can, and does that decrease risk of injury? Prehabbers, welcome back to the Prehab Podcast. This is your host, Dr. Dillon Caswell. In today's episode, we're talking all about squat depth. How low do you need to squat to be able to prevent injury? How low do you need to squat to be able to improve sports performance? All of that is covered on this episode. Hope you enjoy it. Today's show is sponsored by the Prehab app. This is not just an app, but a solution. You have the opportunity to take control of your rehab, prehab, fitness, and performance needs, all from the palm of your hand. The app is available for download on the App Store for both Apple and Android users. Also, a free 7-day trial is available. Don't wait. Start taking control of your movement health today. Welcome back to the Prehab Podcast. We're going to start today's episode with a quick question. You walk into the gym. You see a person over at the squat rack. They got their bar loaded up. They unrack it. You're still watching instead of warming up because it just captured your eyes. And you see the person go for a squat. They go maybe a quarter of the way down, and then they pop out of the squat and they re-rack it and they go and put more weight onto the bar. What is your first thought? What is your gut reaction when you see that happen? I know the most common one that we tend to do first is criticize, right? We tend to judge. This person's ego squatting. Why put that much weight on the bar that you can't squat through a full range? We tend to want to go over and maybe give advice and say, hey, it's probably better if you took some weight off and try to reach depth because it's going to be more beneficial. But what we forget to do is pause and ask, maybe this person's very intelligently going through a partial range. And does the squat depth that the person is going through lead to improved health? Or another way to say it is, if you squat lower, does that prevent injury more than squatting another way? And that's what today's episode is all about. It's all about squat depth. Why do we choose the squat depths that we go to? And there's a research showing that if you squat to a particular depth, that's actually going to decrease your risk of injury. So before we do that, I think we need to paint the picture of this big pendulum swing that we've seen of traditionally back in the 50s and 60s of people saying, do not squat low. If you squat low, it's going to cause injury, to the other side of the pendulum that we're seeing now, which is if you are not squatting full range, don't put any weight on the bar, don't do partial range reps. It's a waste of time. Go back to the basics, learn the foundation, and then build yourself up from there. So where do we fall on that pendulum? Are we back in the middle? Are we over towards that you have to get full depth, or are we over towards the partial range is okay? Let's paint the picture, and then we'll get into that discussion. So in the 1950s, Dr. Carl Klein, we've talked about this before on a previous episode, but he set out to start researching why are these college athletes, specifically in football, getting more knee injuries. So he started looking at what has changed in the game. And one thing that has changed is that the athletes started lifting more. They started doing more squatting into their program. What's really funny is that if you look back at the first squat that was ever done, it was called the deep knee bend. And you see the picture of this thing, it'll make you a little nauseous when you look at it because the person's up on the balls of their feet, their knees are out to the side, they're way out in front of the toes, bars across their back, and they're just squatting away. It's very far away from the traditional squat that we tend to see today. But from his research, again, he wanted to look at college athletes and knee injuries and if it was due to squatting. They ended up doing the research on weightlifters. Not college athletes, but on weightlifters. He made his own instrument that wasn't able to be repeated. So that lets you know that it wasn't a great study. And the research or the results that they showed and what they concluded was that doing a deep knee bend creates ligament laxity. It's not good for your knees. You should omit this in your training program. And by doing this, you'll decrease knee injuries. This research made its way into Sports Illustrated. And then by the 60s, this was spreading all over the place that you should not squat below parallel because it causes damage to your knees. Another researcher, Dr. John Polskamp, came back with a different study and said, that's not the case. That's not true. You should actually be squatting to depth and you shouldn't be fearful of this movement. Obviously, we fall more towards the Dr. John Polskamp research because we shouldn't be fear-mongering, especially with research and data that really was very, very poorly done. So then we got this pendulum going back and forth. We have one saying that you shouldn't squat below depth, below 90 degrees, and we have one saying that you can do it and you shouldn't be fearful of it. But have you ever stopped and asked, well, where does this depth come from? Who made up this 90-degree depth of you should squat to 90 degrees or below, and that's how you squat? Who made this up? There's not research showing that squatting below 90 degrees is going to decrease injury or lead to improved health necessarily. There's not research saying that only doing partial rep squats is a waste of time. So where does the standard come from? It actually comes from powerlifting. In powerlifting competitions, they needed a way to judge the weight that was being moved and to make it comparable and standardized from competitor to competitor. So they made up this 90-degree standard because it was easy for the judges to tell that this person got to 90 degrees or below. And if they didn't get to 90 degrees, well, this didn't count. That weight that was lifted is invalid. So it was an easy way to make these judgments during competition. But if you're a power lifter, that really matters. That matters that you're hitting depth. If you are an Olympic weightlifter, it really matters that you can get to the bottom of a squat, catch weight, and lift it up. If you're a functional fitness athlete that has Olympic lifting or competitive squats in your competitions, then it is really important that you can squat below 90 degrees, again, with heavier load. We do believe that without load, we should be able to squat below 90 and get back up with no load. This is particular to with weight going across your back with a barbell, whether it's a back squat or a front squat. So we just want to make that clear for general health. Absolutely. Let's be able to squat down below 90. Let's be able to sit there. Let's show that we have good hip mobility, good knee mobility, good ankle dorsiflexion mobility. But this conversation is specifically with weight, with load, with a barbell going across the back, whether it's a back squat or a front squat. So that standard 90 degrees matters for some people. But what if that's not your sport? What if you are a field athlete or a court athlete? For example, let's say that you're playing baseball or football or field hockey or basketball, or you're playing ice hockey. Doesn't matter that you squat as low as you can. And does that decrease risk of injury? Because the goal in that bucket of the conversation is performance. To improve performance, that depends on your ability to show up and put the work in, whether it's practice, whether it's strength and conditioning, whether it's the actual game. It's the ability to show up and be able to compete. So by squatting, again, to this depth below 90 degrees, does that decrease your risk of injury, which thereby, if you're not injured, could then improve your performance? And we're going to go to a study that was done here that was in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. It was done in 2020, and the lead author on this one is Marcus Case. They looked at D1 collegiate athletes. They looked at male and female. Male, they looked at football players. Female, they looked at volleyball and softball. What they did is preseason, they had them perform their 1 rep max back squat. So they got their relative squat strength, 1 rep max back squat. They then followed the athletes through the season, and they looked and they were trying to find a pattern. The athletes that lifted more weight, what was their injury profile? The athletes that lift less weight, what was their injury profile, and did any patterns emerge? So they looked back at the data retrospectively. This is what they found. Males with relative squat strength of below 2.2 times and females below 1.6 times their body weight were more prone to lower extremity injury over a season. So again, their findings were that if you're a male and it was 2.2 times less than your body weight, and if you're a female and it was 1.6 times your body weight, or below 1.6 times your body weight, then you were more prone to injury. From that, we might look at that study and say, well, yeah, it's right there. That means you need to squat more weight. You need to hit full depth with a squat, because squatting decreases your risk for injury. And we would say that's a way to start interpreting the study. Then we have to start looking at other studies, because other studies have shown that it's not particular necessarily the movement, but it's more the overall strength that the athlete has. The best way to prevent injury is by getting stronger. And there's multiple ways to get stronger. A squat, a loaded barbell back squat, is a way to get stronger. But can you get as strong doing a lunge with dumbbells? Can you get as strong doing a Bulgarian split squat holding weights at your side? Can you get just as strong doing a box squat and then having a superset with that movement to hit some isolated muscle groups? In research, one that comes to mind is O'Kane et al. In 2017, showed that in each muscle group, as each muscle group got stronger, the athlete had a decreased risk of injury. So again, we have to be careful. It's not specific to the movement, but it seems to be specific to the amount of strength that athlete has. If that confused you, let's go through an example of what we're talking about, because the other side of the story is that, maybe these partial range squats are okay. And maybe if we intelligently program them for specific reasons, they do have a time and place. And by understanding that, maybe we become less critical of what people are doing in the weight room and have an understanding of maybe why they are doing that. There is the case that, yeah, maybe they are just ego lifting and trying to get as much weight and doing a quarter knee bend. And I just squatted 350 pounds. And you're like, no, you didn't. You unracked it, put a lot of compression into your spine, bent your knees a little bit, and then put the weight back. So there's always two sides of the story. But let's go through an example here. Let's take a ice hockey athlete. This athlete's playing ice hockey. By the way, if you've been watching the Stanley Cup Finals, the Florida Panthers are just absolutely upsetting every team that they've been playing. It's phenomenal to watch as long as you're not a Bruins fan or a Hurricanes fan. So if you are one of those two fans, sorry for bringing that up. It's probably too soon, but it is remarkable what the Florida Panthers have done throughout these Stanley Cup playoffs. But anyway, so we have hockey. How many times does a hockey player during competition get into a full depth squat? If you're thinking about it, I'm going to help you out and let you know that that number is zero. Very rarely, or 0 times, are they getting into a full depth squat during the competition. What's the number one injury that ice hockey players will face? The number one injury tends to be groin injuries or adductor injuries. Fascinating muscle. We've done an entire podcast on that. Go ahead and listen to that one if you want to learn more about the groin. But in hockey, the groin is the number one muscle group that tends to be injured. When we squat and we get below 90 degrees, even above 90 degrees, but furthermore below 90 degrees, this movement becomes an adductor dominant movement. And we said previously that the stronger that the muscles become or the stronger the athlete becomes, then they decrease their risk for injury. So if we want to decrease the risk of injury for a hockey player, and we know that groin injuries are the number one injuries that they're going to face, we can get the groin stronger, increase its threshold, so that when it's in competition, it's less likely to be injured. And a squat might be a great way to do that if they're able to get that full depth. But when we look at the specificity of the sport, it's very rare that the hockey player is doing a full depth squat. So should we have full depth squats in their strength and conditioning program? Should we have full depth squats as part of their prehab, part of their injury prevention program? And the answer to that, which we kind of always fall on, is that it depends. If the athlete is able to get that full depth position, they're not losing integrity, and they're coming out of that position, then it might be awesome for that athlete to be hitting full depth squats. If that's not the case, if they're going for full depth, but as soon as they break below parallel, their chest is falling forward, they're showing this good morning fall, it's no longer becoming a squat movement, it's becoming a hip hinge because they're cranking their low back to get out of the bottom and then standing up with it, that squat's probably not accomplishing what it was set out to do in that program. It's no longer an adductor injury prevention program because of the way that that movement's being completed. I think a lot of times we get stuck in this idea that, well, squats are great because they work this muscle group and it will prevent this injury. And the thing that we forget is that can be true, but it depends on how the person is performing that movement, right? A deadlift, for example, a person can be doing a deadlift, but squatting the weight up and down. And by doing that, they're actually not targeting their hamstrings. They're getting more of the anterior chain, more of their quads. And then you're wondering, well, why did their hamstrings get injured? We did this program, we deadlifted, we did all these things for the hamstrings, but they end up getting an injury. And it's because the way that movement was performed. So it's not just the movement, but it's how it's performed. So if this hockey athlete that we're using in this example is able to get full depth, get in and out of it, they're showing good integrity, they're not having these common compensations that we see, that might be really good for that athlete to use to prevent injuries for their sport because they're getting their groin stronger, and their groin is the number one thing injured in hockey. But on the other side of this, if that athlete goes to do the squat and they get below parallel and it's a mess, their chest is falling forward, there's all these compensations happening, it's not ideal for that athlete to keep completing that squat. What might be more ideal is having them do a partial range squat, so they're getting the benefits of this full body exercise, because back squats and deadlifts, they're two of the best exercises that you can do because the amount of muscles that they work. I would go back and say that I was just saying that the adductor is biased in this movement, but know that there's 800 to thousands of other muscles that are contracting during a squat from the head all the way down to the toes. There's a lot of muscles that are working. But back to this athlete, they can't squat below parallel. It's a mess. The form is all off. But if they stay above, They're doing fine. Maybe we have this athlete do box squats. Maybe we create a block to them going below 90 degrees because this is more beneficial to them. Because at the end of the day, if we want to get work done, and work, we could say strength or it's hypertrophy, but work equals force times distance. If you are doing a full depth squat, the likelihood is that the amount of load, the weight that you can move through that full range is going to be decreased because the distance is going to be greater. With a box squat, the weight that you can move, the force that you can move is going to be higher because the distance is going to be lower. So with that, we can accomplish the same amount of work. And I would encourage you guys to try that at your home gym or at the gym. See how much weight you can move with a full depth squat, and see how much more weight you can move with a box squat because of that change in that force times distance. So we can get a similar amount of work done with a partial range or a full depth range, depending on the load that is being shifted around. But when we hit different depths, we bias different muscles. So if we were to use that debate or that end of the argument, then you would still say, well, okay, we did the box squat, we got work done, but did we prevent the injury or the area that's at high risk for injury, the groin, because they didn't reach full depth? And we know that below 90 degrees, it becomes more adductor dominant. And the answer to that is we have to become more intuitive. We have to have more rationale in our programming when this happens. That athlete that's not able to hit a full depth squat, they're going partial range to the box. Let's superset that with an adductor specific movement because we're talking about hockey. So they would do their box squats and then superset that with a Copenhagen, which if you've never heard of a Copenhagen before, you're on your side, your top leg is up on the box, you're lifting yourself up into a side plank by using that top leg to lift your body up, which is a really great way to start to develop strength in the adductor group to decrease the risk of injury while also getting the benefits of a whole body movement in, such as a squat. So both can have their time and place. And we have to look at the specificity of the sport. So quick recap on that section. Do you need to do full depth squats? If it's part of your sport and you want to load up and you need that for Olympic weightlifting or functional fitness, then it's worthwhile doing. If you are a specific field athlete or court athlete, or you're on the ice and you're not able to do a full depth squat without keeping good integrity, well, then let's do partial range, but then superset that with the muscle that could be injured in that sport so that there's more specificity involved in that. I go back to the podcast we did with Dr. Andy Barr talking about Kevin Durant and his Achilles recovery, his Achilles tendon repair, and his recovery getting back to the NBA. When you have a guy that's tall, 6 feet, near 7 feet, they have long lever arms, it actually could be risky having them go through a full depth squat. And it's not needed, right? Because in basketball, how often is this athlete in a full depth squat? Probably not needed. But for that athlete, can we get them really strong using other variations, lunges, Bulgarian split squats, box squats, and then supersetting that with Nordic hamstring curls or single leg hamstring bridges? Or if we're looking at the adductor, doing Copenhagens. And the answer is yeah. So it's a good time to take that step back and go, there is a time and place for partial range movements, as long as we have rationale behind it. And it's not, again, to fulfill ego for the amount of weight that's lifted. So that covers squat depth for performance. But the other thing that we need to bring up is, well, what about if a person is in pain or a person is doing rehab? Really cool example that I can share with you is with some CrossFit athletes that I work with that might be dealing with a hip impingement type syndrome, meaning that when they squat, the front of their hip is getting irritated and they're not able to keep squatting because it just becomes more and more irritated. At the same time, they have a competition coming up and they don't want to lose their ability to keep good spinal integrity with a lot of a compression load going across their back, so a heavy barbell on their back. So where's the happy medium in that? Well, the beautiful thing with this is that we can continue to condition core integrity and this load of spinal compression by using a box squat, because we're keeping them out of the range that's creating their symptoms or flaring up their symptoms. They're still getting the benefits of the bar going across their back and getting through a range that is asymptomatic. And then we can decrease the load, maybe go heels elevated, or maybe keep their trunk a little bit more upright, and now start working back towards the depth of the squat or getting into the full depth squat. So know that not just for performance, but also in pain and rehab, there might be really good reasons as to why someone is using a partial range squat. So we'll start wrapping up this episode with the food for thought or something to keep in mind. And I want to quote a really good strength coach, Charles Staley, who in an article said, "Few of us criticize the use of varying grip widths on bench press or starting positions on deadlifts. We simply view these as choices, as tools to be intelligently applied in the training process." So we asked that question, why do we do that with squats? Why do we hop on judging and criticizing the depth of the squat? Instead of judging and criticizing a movement, we should seek the why or the rationale behind each movement. In doing so, what we can do is then create a better program that's well-rounded to help prevent injuries for that specific athlete. Hoping you enjoyed that episode and it allowed you to think a little bit differently about full depth squats versus partial range squats and help to settle that pendulum back into the middle a little bit. Well, let's cover the key takeaways. Key takeaway number 1, for general health, we should be able to squat below parallel with no weight. But when we start adding load, it becomes a bit more specific or needs to be individualized. Key takeaway number 2, reflecting and asking, why are we using this particular movement? What depth needs to be completed to transfer to sport or to that person's life? Can it be achieved by intelligently using different ranges, supersetted with other movements to bias particular muscle groups? Key takeaway number 3, before judging or criticizing, seek rationale and understanding. Rehabbers, thank you for listening. Thank you for viewing. Thank you for all the comments. If you are enjoying this podcast and you want to help to get it to other people, please share it with them and subscribe. Helping to subscribe is the lifeblood of podcasts that helps it get to more and more people. It helps it become more discoverable. In doing that, you're helping other people to be able to take control of their health. All right, we'll talk to you soon.